You're just dead weight, Evie. Julian Thorne said with a cold smirk as he deliberately strolled around my desk in the open-plan marketing department. His voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the low hum of the office. We're cutting costs across the board, and frankly, your position here is entirely unnecessary. A sudden, uncomfortable hush fell over the Boston office floor. 20 pairs of eyes, belonging to colleagues I'd worked alongside for 2 years, froze above their keyboards. They pretended intense focus on their screens. A silent audience to our CEO publicly dismantling my carefully constructed identity at Hayes Biopharma. Your recent campaign proposals lack any real creativity, Julian continued, his voice pitched perfectly to Carrie. Ensuring everyone heard my humiliation. You consistently question processes that are proven effective, dragging the team down. And your contribution analysis reports are consistently late. None of it was remotely true, blatant fabrications designed to justify his decision. But I held my ground, maintained the facade of composure I had perfected, my hands folded calmly in my lap beneath the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath the practiced calm. You have until 5 p.m. today to clear out your desk, he decreed, gesturing dismissively towards my workspace. Sophia in HR has all your termination paperwork ready. The sharp click of Julian's expensive Italian leather shoes echoed my impending departure as he turned away. He didn't bother to lower his voice as he added, a parting shot meant for the entire floor. Some people just don't possess the drive or the vision required to succeed in this competitive industry. A flicker of defiance sparked within me, overriding the sting of the public rebuke. I allowed a small, controlled smile to touch my lips and responded simply, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Fine, Mr. Thorne. Fire me. Julian paused mid-stride, his back stiffening for a fraction of a second. He half-turned, a flicker of annoyance, perhaps disappointment, crossing his usually impassive features. He'd clearly expected tears, maybe desperate pleading, not this quiet, unwavering dignity. He wanted a scene, a confirmation of his power, and I refused to give it to him. My name is Evelyn Hayes, though for the past 2 years, everyone here has known me only as Evie Daniels. I'm 38 years old. And the crucial detail Julian Thorne, our ambitious CEO, remains blissfully unaware of is that I own a controlling 87% stake in Hayes Biopharma. The company founded by my grandfather and bearing my family name. 2 years ago, my life took an unexpected turn. My father, the heart and soul of Hayes Biopharma, passed away suddenly, leaving me not only devastated but also the inheritor of his controlling interest in the company. The board, understandably anxious about stability and investor confidence after Dad's death, pushed for a swift appointment of a new CEO. Though I had an MBA and years of experience within the company, I felt uncertain. Grief was still raw, and perhaps a sliver of self-doubt lingered. I agreed we should look externally, find someone with fresh energy to lead Hayes into a new era, someone untainted by the recent loss. Julian Thorne arrived with impeccable credentials glowing on his resume, a Harvard Business School degree, successful, albeit ruthless leadership stints at 2 major healthcare conglomerates, and an impressive, almost unbelievable, track record of boosting profitability. His interview was a masterclass in corporate charm. He spoke eloquently, passionately, about respecting Hayes Biopharma's core values, my father's legacy, while simultaneously pursuing aggressive strategic growth. The board was utterly captivated. They saw a savior. I remained cautiously optimistic, trying to quell the uneasy feeling in my gut. But reports soon trickled up, whispers of changes that felt fundamentally wrong. Rather than rely on polished executive summaries from afar, I knew I needed the unfiltered truth. My decision to go undercover within the company I owned was unorthodox, perhaps even drastic, but I felt it was utterly necessary. I had to see the reality of Julian's leadership from the ground level. So, I created Evie Daniels. With a deliberately unassuming hairstyle, clothes chosen to blend into the background, and my grandmother's maiden name on my ID badge. I leveraged my marketing knowledge, conveniently omitting the MBA, to secure a mid-level marketing assistant position. Evelyn Hayes vanished, replaced by Evie Daniels, just another face in the corporate machine. Invisible. For 2 long years, I observed. I listened. I documented everything. I saw Julian implement cost-cutting measures disguised as efficiency improvements. that systematically compromised the quality my father had championed. I witnessed talented, dedicated colleagues, people who bled Hayes Biopharma blue, leave disillusioned after being publicly belittled or privately undermined by Julian and his carefully selected inner circle of sycophants. I felt the slow, insidious transformation of our once collaborative, innovative culture into a toxic environment ruled by fear, suspicion, and blatant favoritism. My plan had been to remain embedded for another 6 months, gathering irrefutable evidence before revealing myself and initiating a course correction. But Julian's callous, public humiliation today had drastically accelerated my timeline. The shareholders' meeting scheduled for tomorrow, which Julian undoubtedly anticipated as a rubber stamp for his quarterly update and perhaps more, would now serve a very, very different purpose. As I began the demoralizing task of packing the few personal items I kept at my Evie Daniels desk, a chipped mug, a small framed photo of a beloved pet, a well-worn marketing textbook, I noticed Marcus Vance from the legal department watching me. His expression was etched with genuine concern, a stark contrast to the feigned indifference of others. Marcus, bless his loyal heart, had worked for Hayes Biopharma since before I was born, a steadfast presence since my grandfather's era. He was one of only 3 people within these walls who knew my true identity and the purpose behind my charade. "Everything all right, Evie?" he asked quietly, his eyes darting discreetly towards Julian's closed office door at the far end of the floor. His voice was low, barely audible above the renewed clicking of keyboards. "It will be, Marcus," I assured him, meeting his gaze with a steady look that conveyed more than words could say. "Soon." His brow furrowed deeper, concern tightening the lines around his kind eyes. He leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. "He's making bigger, faster moves than you realize, Evelyn." He rarely used my real name here, a measure of his seriousness. "The termination list for tomorrow's board presentation." He hesitated, the words clearly difficult for him. "It's extensive." A beat of silence hung between us. Entire departments are on the chopping block. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each word he spoke. My shoulders tensed involuntarily. This was far worse, moving far faster than even my most pessimistic projections had anticipated. Julian wasn't just tweaking the culture or trimming the fat. He was preparing to butcher the company's very foundation, sacrificing long-term stability and loyal employees for the intoxicating allure of immediate, unsustainable profit spikes. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice low but firm, holding his worried gaze meaningfully. "Your loyalty means more than I can say. I'll see you tomorrow. Be careful, Evelyn." His final whispered words hung in the air as I turned back to my desk. Hayes Biopharma wasn't just a business entity on paper to me. It wasn't just shares and assets. It was my heritage, woven into the fabric of my identity. My grandpa started it all decades ago, tinkering in his small Raleigh garage, driven by a desire to develop affordable, effective alternatives to the prohibitively expensive medications flooding the market. He believed healthcare shouldn't bankrupt families. My dad inherited that vision and expanded the company carefully, transforming it into a respected mid-sized operation known throughout the industry for both its groundbreaking innovation and unwavering integrity. We never chased the colossal growth of the pharmaceutical giants, the Viridian Dynamics of the world. That was a conscious choice, a commitment Dad fiercely defended. Our mission, etched into the company's charter and, more importantly, into its culture, had always been about maintaining a delicate balance. Profitable enough to fuel crucial research and development, yet ethical enough to always prioritize patients over excessive profits. When Dad died 2 years ago, suddenly, shockingly, from a massive heart attack while reviewing trial data, I was heading a promising research project at our Raleigh facility, the very place my grandfather started it all. The board, thrown into turmoil and intensely nervous about maintaining investor confidence without my father's steady hand at the helm, wanted to name a new CEO immediately. They needed reassurance, a clear signal of continuity. Though I possessed the experience, the deep understanding of our unique mission, and, crucially, the controlling interest, I hesitated. Maybe it was the grief, maybe a lack of confidence in stepping into his giant shoes so soon. I suggested we look externally, find a seasoned leader who could bring fresh energy and perspective. Someone who could navigate the turbulent waters ahead while I focused on preserving the company's core values from within the board. Enter Julian Thorne. He arrived presenting impeccable credentials, the Harvard Business School MBA. Highly touted leadership roles at two major healthcare companies, conveniently glossing over the massive layoffs that occurred under his watch. And that dazzling record of rapidly increasing profitability. His performance during the interview process was flawless, captivating. He spoke with convincing eloquence about honoring Hayes Biopharma's legacy, about maintaining our patient-centric values, all while pursuing necessary, strategic growth initiatives in a rapidly evolving market. The board members, eager for a strong hand and seduced by his confident vision, were utterly smitten. I confess, even I was cautiously optimistic, hoping his talk of respecting our values wasn't just lip service. My subsequent decision to work anonymously within Hayes Biopharma, adopting the persona of Evie Daniels, was certainly unorthodox. A significant personal risk. But I felt it was the only way. I needed the unvarnished, unfiltered truth about the company's direction under Julian, not the carefully curated, polished reports that inevitably made their way to the executive suites and the board. I had to understand the real impact of his decisions on the ground floor, on the people who were the lifeblood of the company. So, I became Evie Daniels, marketing assistant. I leveraged my genuine background in pharmaceutical marketing, carefully downplaying my strategic experience and omitting the MBA, to secure a position analyzing campaign effectiveness and market feedback within our bustling Boston headquarters. The first year under Julian's leadership seemed, on the surface, to validate the board's choice. Profits climbed an impressive 18%. We successfully expanded Hayes Biopharma's footprint into 2 new therapeutic areas, generating positive headlines. From my vantage point within the marketing department, however, buried beneath the glossy reports, I noticed deeply concerning trends emerging. Research and development budgets, the engine of our future innovation, were being quietly but steadily reduced, masked by complex reallocation jargon. Long-serving, experienced employees, repositories of invaluable institutional knowledge, were being subtly pushed out or overtly replaced with cheaper, less experienced contractors. Crucial quality control measures, the bedrock of our reputation and patient safety, were being streamlined to the absolute bare minimum, dangerously close to the point of significant risk. In management meetings I attended as Evie Daniels, Julian presented himself as a charismatic, visionary leader. He possessed undeniable intelligence and a chillingly uncanny ability to make even the most ruthless, damaging decisions sound not only necessary but positively forward-thinking. He spoke lyrically about strategic realignment, optimizing operational efficiency, and maximizing shareholder value, while systematically, piece by piece, undermining the very principles and practices that had made Hayes Biopharma special, respected, and ethically sound. I attempted to address these mounting concerns through the established proper channels, playing the role of a diligent, slightly naive employee. As Evie Daniels, I submitted detailed reports highlighting potential quality issues flagged in customer feedback data. I cautiously spoke up in departmental meetings, questioning the logic behind certain budget cuts that seemed counterintuitive to long-term brand health. I even proposed alternative marketing approaches that could achieve savings without compromising our ethical standards or risking patient trust. Julian consistently dismissed these efforts, his initial feigned attentiveness quickly morphing into thinly veiled annoyance. Eventually, he labeled me a negative influence and resistant to necessary change. In my annual performance review, a clear warning shot across my bow. Initially, I admit, a small part of me had tried to respect Julian's ambition and relentless drive. I clung to the hope that he genuinely wanted to make Hayes Biopharma stronger, just with a different, perhaps more aggressive approach than my family's. But watching him operate day after day, witnessing his interactions, his decisions, the casual cruelty veiled in corporate speak, revealed his true, unvarnished priorities: short-term profit boosts at any cost, relentless personal advancement, and absolute, unquestioning control. The day before my termination, my suspicions about his ultimate endgame solidified into chilling certainty. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I overheard Julian speaking in low, urgent tones to our CFO. His usual polished veneer was slightly cracked, revealing the raw ambition beneath. Once we streamline these underperforming departments and finalize moving the Raleigh production offshore, Julian said. His voice tight with excitement, we'll be perfectly positioned for the Viridian Dynamics merger. He paused, savoring the thought. My bonus structure on that deal, it will be astronomical. Merger? Viridian Dynamics? The name hit me like a physical blow. This was the absolute first, I'd heard of any concrete merger plans involving a specific company. Let alone a behemoth like Viridian known for hostile takeovers and ruthless asset stripping. Merger plans that would fundamentally alter Hayes Biopharma's identity and mission. Plans that would undoubtedly require board approval. Plans that would absolutely require shareholder approval. Plans that, crucially, would require my approval as the majority shareholder. He was moving faster, and far more recklessly, than I could have imagined. The morning after Julian's public execution of Evie Daniels, I arrived in the lobby of my downtown Boston apartment building to find Sophia Ramirez from Human Resources waiting for me. The usually composed HR specialist looked distinctly uncomfortable. Her anxious expression immediately signaling this wasn't a friendly check-in or a procedural follow-up. This felt different. Ms. Daniels, she began, her voice hushed and nervous, fiddling with the strap of her bag. I have your separation agreement. She held out a thick, official-looking envelope, avoiding my eyes. Mr. Thorne asked me to personally ensure you receive this and understand the confidentiality clauses. Her discomfort was palpable. I took the envelope, my fingers brushing hers briefly. I quickly scanned the document inside, my eyes catching the densely worded, overly broad non-disparagement sections designed to silence me completely. And then, the severance offer, a pitiful 2 weeks' pay. 2 weeks' pay in exchange for signing away my right to discuss anything about my 2 years of employment or my observations at Hayes Biopharma. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. There's also this, Sophia added hesitantly, passing me another, thinner form. Her hand trembled slightly. It's a formal notification. It states that your company subsidized apartment must be vacated within 30 days. I had momentarily forgotten that my relatively modest apartment was located in a building Hayes Biopharma had invested in years ago as part of an employee housing initiative, one of my father's projects. Ironically, Julian, it seemed, was leaving absolutely nothing to chance, meticulously cutting every tie, applying maximum pressure. He wanted me gone, silenced, and out of sight. Quickly. Thank you, Sophia, I said, my voice carefully neutral as I took both documents. My mind was racing, processing the vindictiveness of it all. I'll review these carefully. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the empty lobby as if expecting Julian himself to materialize. There's something else, Ms. Daniels. Evie. She took a deep breath, her gaze finally meeting mine, filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. It's not official yet. Not announced, but... She lowered her voice to a near whisper. Julian is planning to outsource the entire core research division to India. My blood ran cold. The research division? Neurogenics? He says it's cost optimization, but over 100 people, brilliant scientists, dedicated researchers. They'll all lose their jobs right after the quarterly meeting. The research division wasn't just a department. It was the heart and soul of Hayes Biopharma. It housed the dedicated, brilliant scientists, many recruited by my father. Some who had been with us for decades, who had developed the life-changing medications that formed the bedrock of our company's reputation and mission. Neurogenics, our most promising pipeline drug, was born there. Why are you telling me this, Sophia? I asked quietly, searching her face. This was an enormous risk for her. Because it's wrong, she answered simply, a fierce conviction suddenly hardening her features. Everything he's doing, it feels fundamentally wrong. Your reports, the ones you submitted about the quality concerns from customer feedback? You were right. Her voice trembled slightly again, this time with indignation. 2 of our most promising trial medications, including preliminary neurogenics results, failed critical late-stage testing protocols because of the shortcuts he forced the teams to implement. He buried those results. Completely buried them. And then he fired the team leads who tried to raise the alarm internally. This revelation struck deeper than the personal insult of my firing or the planned layoffs. This was worse than I had dared to imagine. Julian wasn't just poisoning the company culture and betraying employee trust. He was actively jeopardizing patient safety, compromising our scientific integrity, and potentially destroying the future of our most valuable asset. All for short-term gains and a lucrative merger deal. "Thank you for your honesty, Sophia," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I understand the risk you're taking by telling me this. I won't forget it." She gave me a small, shaky nod and hurried away, disappearing into the Boston morning. After Sophia left, I sank onto one of the lobby benches, the thick separation agreement feeling heavy and toxic in my hands. I sat there for a long time, the bustle of the city outside muffled by the glass, processing the cascade of new, devastating information. My 2-year experiment in anonymity, my undercover mission, had shown me exactly what I needed to see, the rot festering beneath the polished surface of Julian's leadership. But at what terrible cost? How many careers had already been damaged or destroyed? How many patients, relying on the integrity of Hayes Biopharma's products, had been unknowingly put at risk by his reckless pursuit of profit? My phone buzzed sharply in my pocket, jolting me from my dark thoughts. A secure message from Marcus, meeting moved up. Shareholder and keyboard briefing now 10 a.m. tomorrow. Julian presenting new strategy. Viridian merger announcement expected then. Be ready. He had accelerated the timeline again. Julian was clearly trying to push his entire agenda through, the merger, the layoffs, the outsourcing, before any significant opposition could possibly mobilize. He wanted it signed, sealed, and delivered before anyone could delve too deeply into the details. I glanced at my watch, the familiar weight of my father's old timepiece a comforting presence on my wrist. It was 8:30 a.m. I had less than 90 minutes. 90 minutes to prepare to dismantle Julian Thorne's carefully constructed empire and reclaim my family's company. Back in my apartment, which now felt temporary and hostile, I went straight to my secure home office setup. I pulled up the comprehensive contingency plan I'd been meticulously developing over the past year. Praying I wouldn't need it but preparing for the worst. Codenamed Phoenix Initiative, it detailed a complete restructuring of Hayes Biopharma's leadership. A significant reinvestment in our core values of research and integrity. And robust protections for the loyal employees, the true assets, who made Hayes Biopharma what it was. I had hoped, perhaps naively, to implement these changes collaboratively, gradually, after revealing myself on my own terms. But Julian, in his arrogance and greed, had forced my hand. There was no time for gradual change now, decisive action was required. As I dressed for the meeting, selecting the impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit I hadn't worn in 2 years, the armor of Evelyn Hayes, CEO in waiting, I felt a complex, turbulent mix of emotions swirling within me. Sharp disappointment that Julian had so thoroughly betrayed the trust placed in him. Burning anger at the callous, cruel way he treated dedicated employees, viewing them as mere cogs in his profit machine. And a heavy weight of guilt, acknowledging that my undercover experiment, however necessary I felt it was, had inadvertently allowed him the time and opportunity to inflict so much damage. My phone buzzed again, another encrypted message from Marcus lighting up the screen. An update, terse and chilling. Julian's exec assistant accidentally CC'd me on tomorrow's draft press release sent to Viridian's comms team. They're announcing the closure of the Raleigh facility. Effective immediately post-merger. 230 jobs eliminated. Raleigh, the place where it all began. My grandfather's garage workshop had stood on that very site. My father had poured his heart and soul into expanding that facility, transforming it into a state-of-the-art research and production center, creating hundreds of well-paying, stable jobs in a community that desperately needed them. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't strategy. This was personal. Julian hadn't just attacked the company's finances or its culture. He had deliberately targeted my family's legacy, the very roots of Hayes Biopharma. He was trying to erase our history. I carefully tucked my encrypted tablet, loaded with the Phoenix Initiative and 2 years' worth of meticulously gathered evidence, into my leather briefcase. My resolve hardened into cold, sharp steel. The time for observation was over. It was time for Evelyn Hayes to step out of the shadows and reclaim what was rightfully hers. Hayes Biopharma occupied the top 5 floors of a sleek, imposing glass and steel tower overlooking Boston Harbor. Its presence dominated the skyline, a symbol of modern corporate power. I entered through the main lobby, a vast, echoing space of polished granite and abstract art. I nodded coolly to the security guards at the main desk, their eyes sliding over me without a flicker of recognition. They saw only an expensively dressed woman, not the marketing assistant they occasionally glimpsed, nor the building's ultimate owner. Instead of heading towards the general elevator bank that ascended to the marketing department on the 3rd floor, Evie Daniels' domain, I walked directly to the discreet executive elevator tucked away in an alcove. I swiped a high-level access keycard I hadn't used in 2 years, the lock clicking open softly. The private car whisked me silently upwards. The main boardroom was located on the top floor, a sprawling, opulent space designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking panoramic views of the harbor and the city beyond. As I approached the heavy oak double doors, I could hear Julian's confident, resonant voice echoing from within, already addressing the gathered board members and key shareholders. He was clearly mid-presentation, painting a rosy picture of his latest maneuvers. An unprecedented opportunity for strategic growth and market consolidation, he was saying, his tone smooth and persuasive. The Viridian Dynamics merger will immediately position Hayes Biopharma to compete effectively with the industry's top-tier players, while simultaneously providing exceptional, near-term shareholder value. I paused just outside the partially open door, listening intently, my hand hovering over the handle. He was already deep into discussing the merger, framing it not as a proposal but as a foregone conclusion. A brilliant strategic coup he had single-handedly orchestrated. But what about the research division, Julian? A familiar voice interjected. It was Elias Vance, his tone carrying the weight of his long tenure and quiet authority. Mr. Vance, my father's closest confidant on the board, our longest-serving director, and a man of deep integrity. Hayes Biopharma's reputation, our entire foundation, is built on innovation, on groundbreaking research. Research, Elias, can be conducted far more cost-effectively elsewhere in today's globalized market, Julian replied smoothly, dismissing the concern with practiced ease. His tone was condescendingly patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. We are strategically trimming unnecessary legacy expenses to maximize our operational efficiency and, frankly, our appeal to Viridian Dynamics. He paused for effect. Speaking of which, I have prepared a comprehensive restructuring plan detailing these necessary optimizations, ready for your approval today. That was my cue. Enough listening from the shadows. It was time. Taking a deep breath, steadying my nerves, I pushed the heavy door open and entered the boardroom. 14 faces swiveled towards me, their expressions a kaleidoscope of reactions, shock, utter confusion, polite disinterest morphing into curiosity. And, in the case of Marcus Vance, who sat near the end of the table, a carefully concealed flicker of deep satisfaction behind his professional mask. Julian recovered almost instantly, his surprise quickly masked by irritation and arrogance. His eyes narrowed as he registered my executive attire, so different from the Evie Daniels he knew. I'm sorry, he snapped, his voice sharp with authority. This is a private meeting for the board and invited shareholders only. Security will escort you out immediately. He reached for the intercom button on the console in front of him, ready to summon guards. But before his finger could connect, Elias Vance spoke first, his voice calm but carrying undeniable weight in the suddenly silent room. Evie? Is that really you? All eyes shifted from me to Mr. Vance, then back again, confusion deepening. Hello, Mr. Vance, I said calmly, my voice steady and clear as I walked purposefully towards the long, polished mahogany table. I placed my briefcase firmly on its surface, the soft click echoing in the stillness. It's certainly been a while. Julian's hand froze mid-reach, hovering over the intercom. His head snapped towards Mr. Vance, then back to me, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes, followed by disbelief and a dawning horror. Evie, he repeated, the name sounding foreign and uncertain on his lips. As in Evelyn Hayes. The very same, I confirmed, meeting his gaze directly, holding it. Majority shareholder of Hayes Biopharma. The blood visibly drained from Julian's face, leaving his usually tanned complexion looking sallow and pale beneath the boardroom lights. He stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. But, you're Evie Daniels. From marketing? A necessary, albeit temporary, measure, I explained, deliberately addressing the entire room rather than just him. My voice resonating with newfound authority. Taken to understand the company's day-to-day operations and the impact of its leadership firsthand. I let my gaze sweep across the stunned faces of the board members. And I must say, what I've learned over the past 2 years has been exceptionally illuminating. This is highly irregular. Julian sputtered, desperately trying to regain control of the situation, his composure rapidly crumbling. He straightened his tie, puffing out his chest in a weak imitation of his usual dominance. Ms. Hayes, he said, forcing a semblance of formality, while we appreciate your interest. This meeting is specifically for current executive leadership to present our strategic vision moving forward. Ah yes, the strategic vision, I interrupted smoothly, cutting through his bluster. A vision that apparently includes dismantling our foundational Raleigh facility, outsourcing our entire core research division, and merging this company with Viridian Dynamics. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. All, I might add, without proper, full board approval or the necessary shareholder vote required by our own corporate charter. An uneasy silence fell over the room. Several board members exchanged deeply concerned glances. Whispers began to ripple around the table. These are merely preliminary discussions, Julian insisted, his voice rising slightly in pitch, a hint of panic creeping in. Exploratory scenarios? Nothing has been finalized or decided. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a sheaf of papers, the draft press release Marcus had forwarded me. Then perhaps you can explain, I asked, my voice deceptively mild as I began distributing copies to each board member, why this press release? Drafted for issuance tomorrow morning, announces these exact changes, the merger, the Raleigh closure, the research outsourcing, as finalized. Definitive decisions? I placed a copy directly in front of Julian. His expression hardened instantly into a mask of fury as he recognized the document his own assistant had accidentally sent to Marcus. He knew he was caught. This is a gross misunderstanding, he said, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. It's a hypothetical draft, created solely to explore potential communication strategies around various scenarios. His eyes darted around the table, searching for support, finding only troubled and suspicious faces. Perhaps while we're discussing misunderstandings, I suggested coolly, pressing my advantage. We should also discuss your termination yesterday of a marketing assistant named Evie Daniels, and the disturbing pattern of silencing or removing employees who dare to raise legitimate concerns about product quality, ethical practices, and patient safety under your tenure. Julian's eyes narrowed into slits, his fists clenching beneath the table. She was underperforming, he snapped, resorting to his earlier justification. Her work was substandard. The documentation is perfectly clear. Oh, I'm sure the documentation is meticulously crafted, I countered, my voice dripping with irony. So clear, in fact, that you felt the overwhelming need to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire department, to immediately revoke my company-sponsored housing, to offer a paltry 2 weeks severance pay for 2 years of dedicated service? I let the questions hang in the air, each one a small indictment. The board members were watching this intense exchange with visibly growing discomfort. They were no fools, they could sense the tide turning, the power dynamic shifting dramatically. Julian, ever perceptive to the mood of a room, sensed his position weakening rapidly. He abruptly shifted tactics, adopting a more conciliatory, almost patronizing tone. Look, Evelyn, he said, leaning forward slightly, attempting to create an air of shared understanding, I understand you're upset. Truly, I do. But these decisions, while undoubtedly difficult, are absolutely necessary for Hayes Biopharma's future survival and success. He spread his hands wide, appealing to the board. The pharmaceutical landscape is changing at an unprecedented pace. We must adapt, streamline, become leaner and more agile, or risk being left behind. For a fleeting moment, his confident delivery, his practiced air of command, made even me doubt myself. He was masterful at framing destructive actions as unavoidable necessities, at weaving narratives of progress around policies designed solely for his benefit. No wonder the board, receiving only his filtered version of reality, had been largely persuaded by his vision up until now. You're right about one thing, Julian, I conceded, my voice quiet but firm, drawing his hopeful gaze. We do need to adapt. A small, triumphant smile touched Julian's lips. He clearly sensed victory, believing he had managed to placate the emotional shareholder. I'm glad you understand, Evelyn, he said smoothly. Reason prevails. Which is precisely why, I continued, my voice rising slightly, regaining its edge, meeting his smile with a look of cold determination. As the majority shareholder of Hayes Biopharma, exercising my rights under Article 7, Section 3 of the Corporate Charter, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in your leadership, Julian Thorne. The smug smile froze, then vanished completely from Julian's face, replaced by stunned disbelief. You can't do that, he stammered, his bravado evaporating. Actually, Marcus Vance interjected calmly, sliding a copy of the relevant section of the company bylaws across the polished table towards Julian. According to Article 7, Section 3, she absolutely can. Julian's carefully constructed composure finally cracked wide open. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red. This is absurd, he yelled, slamming his hand down on the table, rattling water glasses. The board appointed me CEO. Only the board has the authority to remove me. With all due respect, Mr. Thorne, I countered calmly, refusing to be intimidated by his outburst, that's not entirely accurate. I distributed another document to the board members, a clear copy of the specific charter article Marcus had referenced. Article 7. Section 3 of our corporate charter explicitly grants the majority shareholder emergency removal powers if the acting CEO is found to be acting contrary to the company's core interests or ethical guidelines without prior full board approval. The board members immediately began reviewing the document, heads bowed in concentration, the implications sinking in. Julian remained standing, rigid with fury, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the heavy table for support. The merger discussions were preliminary, he insisted again, his voice strained. Exploratory. Nothing has been signed. But you've already taken concrete, unauthorized actions based on these preliminary discussions, I pointed out relentlessly. You've terminated employees who questioned your methods. You've demonstrably compromised quality control protocols, risking patient safety. You've prepared and disseminated public announcements declaring these changes finalized. All significant actions taken without the required authorization from this board. Elias Vance cleared his throat, drawing all eyes. Evelyn is correct regarding the provisions of the charter, he stated gravely. The language is quite clear on the majority shareholders' emergency powers under these specific circumstances. He paused, looking around the table. However, he continued judiciously. We should certainly discuss these extremely serious accusations thoroughly before taking any definitive action. I nodded in agreement. I completely agree, Mr. Vance. Transparency is paramount, which is precisely why I've prepared this. I connected my encrypted tablet to the room's large display system. The screen immediately illuminated, filled with a detailed, damning timeline of changes implemented under Julian's leadership over the past 2 years. It showcased the research budget cuts disguised as strategic efficiency measures. The systematic reduction of quality control checkpoints hidden within complex technical jargon updates. The list of experienced employees terminated shortly after raising concerns, and, most critically, the data from the 2 failed late-stage drug trials, including the neurogenics issues, that had mysteriously never appeared in any official reports submitted to the board. Where did you get this information? Julian demanded, his voice hoarse, staring aghast at the screen displaying his concealed actions. I worked inside this company as Evie Daniels for 2 years, Julian, I replied evenly, my gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of the board. I documented everything. But what truly concerns me, I continued, clicking to the next screen, is this. A stark financial risk analysis filled the display. It clearly demonstrated how Julian's relentless focus on short-term profit boosts had created substantial, potentially catastrophic long-term risks for Hayes Biopharma. Pending lawsuits from patients already experiencing adverse side effects from drugs developed under the compromised protocols. Evidence of potential FDA violations related to the buried trial data, carrying the threat of massive fines and crippling sanctions, and the projected financial impact of the imminent loss of our most experienced, irreplaceable researchers due to the planned outsourcing, the very people capable of driving future innovation and revenue. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, charged with tension. The board members looked increasingly troubled, their earlier confidence in Julian visibly eroding with each slide. Julian must have sensed the irreversible shift in the room's mood because he abruptly changed tactics again, resorting to bluster. Even if, he argued loudly, gesturing dismissively at the screen. Even if there were some minor procedural oversights in the pursuit of necessary progress, the results speak for themselves. He thumped the table for emphasis. Profits are up 42% since I took command of this company. Our stock price has nearly doubled under my leadership. At what cost, Julian? I challenged sharply, stepping forward, my voice ringing with passion. At the cost of our hard-earned reputation for quality and integrity? At the cost of the safety of the patients who trust us with their lives? At the cost of the invaluable institutional knowledge held by the loyal employees who built this company alongside my father and grandfather? Business requires tough decisions, Evelyn. Julian shot back dismissively, his lip curling in a sneer. Sentimentality has no place in the boardroom. Your father understood that basic principle, even if you clearly don't. The mention of my father, used as a weapon against me, ignited a fresh wave of cold fury inside me. My father, I retorted, my voice low and intense, understood that Hayes Biopharma's lasting success was built on a foundation of unwavering integrity and relentless innovation. Not by cutting corners and risking lives for the sake of quick, fleeting profits. Julian smirked, a cruel, knowing look in his eyes. Your father also understood the critical importance of experienced, professional leadership, he countered smoothly, delivering what he clearly believed was his checkmate blow. In fact, he specifically requested that an experienced external CEO take over after his death. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Because, between us, he wasn't entirely confident in your abilities to lead the company into the future. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath for a moment. Had my father truly doubted me? Had he confided those doubts to this man, this usurper? The seed of uncertainty he planted threatened to bloom, just as he intended. That's not true. Elias Vance interrupted sharply, his usually calm voice ringing with uncharacteristic anger. He rose partially from his seat, glaring at Julian. Robert Hayes never said any such thing. I was his closest friend and confidant on this board for over 30 years, Mr. Vance declared, his voice resonating with conviction. And I can tell you unequivocally, Robert was immensely proud of Evelyn's contributions to this company, of her intellect, and of her commitment to his values. He saw her as the future. A wave of profound relief washed through me, extinguishing the flicker of doubt Julian had ignited. It was followed immediately by renewed determination, colder and harder than before. Julian was lying, resorting to desperate, personal attacks to undermine my confidence and salvage his position. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Vance continued, his gaze stern. I believe it would be appropriate for you to step outside now while the board discusses these extremely serious matters in private. Julian's expression hardened into defiance. His eyes blazed. I don't take orders from Dash. Security can escort you, if necessary, Mr. Vance suggested mildly, his calm tone somehow more threatening than Julian's bluster. After Julian, radiating impotent fury, reluctantly exited the boardroom, flanked by two stony-faced security guards he himself had likely hired. The room erupted in a cacophony of concerned, urgent discussions. Board members spoke over each other, demanding clarification, expressing outrage, debating the implications. I remained silent, standing near the head of the table, letting them process the flood of information I had presented, allowing the full weight of Julian's betrayal to sink in. Finally, Elias Vance called for order, his quiet authority gradually silencing the room. Before we proceed to a formal vote, he announced, his gaze sweeping across the table, finally resting on me. There is one more piece of information you all need to be aware of. He paused, letting the silence deepen. Julian Thorne hasn't just been secretly planning a merger with Viridian Dynamics. He looked directly at me, his expression grim. He has been actively negotiating, behind the board's back, to sell Hayes Biopharma's most valuable proprietary research, the neurogenics portfolio, directly to Viridian, separately from any potential merger. Research, I might add, that was largely developed by teams Evelyn herself led before Julian even arrived at this company. Shocked murmurs and gasps filled the room. This revelation shifted the ground entirely. This wasn't just about questionable management, cost-cutting, or even hidden data anymore. This was outright theft. Julian had been actively planning to sell the company's crown jewels, innovations with the potential to help millions of patients worldwide. The very future of Hayes Biopharma, purely for his own substantial personal gain. How do you know this, Elias? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, stunned by the depth of his treachery. Mr. Vance slid a thin, unmarked folder across the polished table towards me. Because Viridian Dynamics CEO contacted me directly last week, he explained quietly. He mistakenly assumed, based on his conversations with Julian, that I, as a senior board member, was already aware of this side arrangement. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails exchanged between Julian Thorne and the CEO of Viridian Dynamics. They discussed, in chillingly casual terms, the clandestine sale of Hayes Biopharma's entire neurogenics research portfolio for a fraction of its estimated market value. Crucially, the emails detailed a substantial, separate, consulting fee. $5 million, to be directed personally to Julian upon completion of the technology transfer. The betrayal was absolute, staggering in its audacity. Julian hadn't just compromised our company's values or culture. He had attempted to auction off its very soul, its future, for his own enrichment. The board's vote was swift, decisive, and unanimous. Julian Thorne was to be removed as CEO of Hayes Biopharma, effective immediately. His termination, however, wouldn't magically solve the deeper problems his reign had created. The company culture had become toxic, permeated by fear and mistrust. Trust between employees and leadership, and even among board members, was severely broken. We needed robust measures to prevent such a catastrophic abuse of power from ever happening again. We need to announce this leadership change before the markets close this afternoon, stated Elise Chan, our sharp marketing director. Ever mindful of perception. Otherwise, damaging rumors will spread like wildfire, and the stock could plummet. And what about the immediate operational issues? Asked another board member, voicing practical concerns. The Raleigh facility closure? The research division outsourcing? Julian's executive team has already set those wheels in motion. Contracts might have been signed. I have a comprehensive transition plan ready, the Phoenix Initiative, I assured them, holding up my tablet. It addresses all those points, prioritizing stability and reversing the most damaging directives. But we need to move extremely quickly and decisively. Julian Thorne won't leave quietly or gracefully. As if summoned by my words, the boardroom doors flew open with dramatic force. Julian stormed back in, his face a mask of vindictive triumph. He was flanked by two stern-looking men in expensive suits whom I didn't recognize. This so-called emergency board meeting is a blatant violation of proper corporate notification procedures, Julian announced loudly, projecting false confidence. My legal team is in full agreement that any decisions made here today are procedurally flawed and therefore legally invalid. The two lawyers behind him nodded confidently, exuding an air of smug certainty. One stepped forward, addressing the board directly. As newly appointed outside counsel for Hayes Biopharma, he began smoothly. I must strongly advise this board that the legally mandated protocols for CEO removal have not been adhered to. You are not our outside counsel, Marcus Vance countered sharply, rising slowly from his seat, his quiet demeanor replaced by righteous indignation. My firm, Vance and Associates, has proudly and exclusively represented Hayes Biopharma's legal interests for over 30 years. Not anymore, Julian said smugly, enjoying the confusion he was sowing. I terminated that outdated relationship last month. He gestured towards the two men beside him. Stern Legal Group now represents Hayes Biopharma's interests. My mind raced. Stern Legal Group? That was Gabriel Stern's firm, my intended counsel. Julian couldn't have possibly hired them. This was a bluff. A desperate, confusing tactic. This was a complication I hadn't fully anticipated in its brazenness. If Julian had indeed attempted to change our long-standing legal representation without board approval, even if fraudulently, it could create enough procedural confusion and potential legal challenges to delay his official removal. Markets would close. Damaging rumors would indeed spread. He might gain the precious time he needed to execute his final, destructive plans. This is utterly outrageous, Julian. Elias Vance protested, his voice tight with anger. Changing the company's primary legal counsel requires full board notification and approval, which I received, Julian countered instantly, producing a single sheet of paper with a flourish. He held it up for all to see. 3 board members reviewed and signed off on the transition. I quickly examined the document as he placed it on the table. 3 signatures were indeed scrawled at the bottom, signatures belonging to the 3 board members Julian had personally recruited and appointed shortly after taking over as CEO. Individuals whose loyalty clearly lay with him and his promises of personal enrichment. Perhaps we need to adjourn this meeting immediately, one of Julian's appointed supporters suggested quickly, seizing the opportunity. Sort out this legal representation issue properly through established channels. These hasty decisions, he added, looking pointedly at me, could expose the company and this board to significant legal liability. A palpable wave of doubt and uncertainty crept back into the room. Board members exchanged uneasy, uncertain glances. The momentum was shifting again. Julian's desperate gamble was working. I needed to act decisively, immediately, to regain control. Before we continue down that path, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising tension, calm and clear. I believe there's someone else who should weigh in on this matter. I pressed the intercom button on the console nearest me. Please send in our guest now. The boardroom doors opened once again. An older gentleman, radiating quiet confidence and authority in an impeccably tailored Seville row suit, entered the room. Hello, everyone, he said, his voice calm and measured. I do apologize for the unexpected interruption. Julian Thorne's face drained of all color, becoming a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Gabriel Stern, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What are you doing here? Mr. Stern, the legendary founding partner of Stern Legal Group, the very firm Julian claimed now represented the company, nodded politely, almost imperceptibly, towards Julian before addressing the entire board. I am here today at the express request of Ms. Evelyn Hayes, he stated clearly, his voice commanding immediate attention, to clarify a potentially serious situation. He gestured towards the document Julian had presented. Stern Legal Group has never been retained by Hayes Biopharma. We have no contractual relationship whatsoever. He paused, letting his words sink in. Furthermore, the document claiming otherwise, he continued, his gaze sharp, appears to utilize a forged signature purporting to be from my office. A stunned, absolute silence descended upon the room. Julian's 2 supposed lawyers exchanged panicked glances, their professional facades crumbling. Furthermore, Mr. Stern continued, his tone hardening slightly, I feel compelled to note that impersonating legal counsel, or knowingly utilizing forged documents in a corporate setting, constitutes serious fraud. He gestured discreetly towards Julian's rapidly paling companions. And I can confirm that these 2 gentlemen, he added, his voice laced with ice, are most certainly not attorneys employed by my firm. Stern Legal Group. One of the fake lawyers, sweating profusely, began edging quietly, almost imperceptibly, towards the exit. Additionally, Mr. Stern concluded, turning his attention back to the board. I have taken the liberty of reviewing the relevant sections of the Hayes Biopharma corporate charter provided to me by Ms. Hayes. Her authority as majority shareholder to call for an immediate vote under these circumstances is, in my professional opinion, quite clear and legally sound. Julian's desperate, fraudulent gambit was collapsing around him in spectacular fashion. But he still had one final, desperate card left to play, born of sheer panic. Even if you somehow remove me, he spat, turning wildly to face the board members, his eyes darting frantically. You can't simply undo the agreements already in place. The Raleigh closure, the research outsourcing, those strategic plans are already filed, submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies. Actually, Julian, I interjected calmly, cutting through his panicked lies. No such regulatory filings regarding those specific plans have been submitted. I checked personally with our compliance department just this morning. And what about our preliminary agreement with Viridian Dynamics? He challenged, grasping at straws. That agreement, Elias Vance added firmly, his voice leaving no room for doubt, was explicitly contingent upon full board approval, which, as we now know, it never received. Julian's face contorted into a mask of pure, unbridled fury. He whirled to face me, his body trembling with rage. You planned this. You planned this all along, didn't you? He accused, his voice rising to a near shriek. Working undercover like some spy, gathering distorted information, twisting everything? You set me up. No, Julian, I replied calmly, meeting his wild gaze without flinching. My voice was quiet but carried the weight of conviction. You did that entirely to yourself. You did it the moment you decided to prioritize your own short-term profits and ambition over the long-term health, integrity, and ethical foundation of this company. He turned desperately to the 3 board members he had appointed, his last hope. You need to support me on this, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Remember our private discussions about your significantly enhanced compensation packages after the Viridian merger went through? The blatant, clumsy implication of improper, potentially illegal arrangements hung heavy and toxic in the suddenly silent air. 2 of his appointees shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats, pointedly avoiding his gaze. The third, however, a man named Peterson whom Julian had lauded as a strategic visionary, straightened his posture, his expression hardening into one of profound disapproval. Mr. Thorne, Peterson said coolly, his voice cutting through the tension, are you seriously suggesting that we had some sort of improper, personal quid pro quo arrangement regarding the Viridian merger? He paused, letting the question resonate. Because that, sir, would constitute a very serious breach of our fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. Julian stared at Peterson, aghast. He realized, far too late, that in his desperation, he had just publicly implicated himself, and potentially them, in yet another egregious ethical, possibly criminal, violation. His last shreds of support on the board evaporated instantly, leaving him utterly isolated. As the newly summoned security team arrived, looking distinctly more professional than Julian's earlier detail, to firmly escort a now defeated Julian Thorne and his rapidly disappearing and likely fake legal team from the building, I walked calmly to the head of the long mahogany table. I took my seat. The position, the responsibility, had been rightfully mine all along. I had simply needed the right moment, and the undeniable evidence, to reclaim it. The next morning, I arrived early at the Hayes Biopharma Auditorium for the emergency company-wide town hall meeting I had called. The large space filled quickly, buzzing with anxious energy. Employees gathered in hushed groups, exchanging worried whispers. They had all heard the swirling rumors, the CEO's sudden departure, the cancelled merger talks, but knew nothing concrete. Uncertainty hung heavy in the air. My former colleagues from the marketing department, clustered together near the front, did visible double takes when they saw me step up to the podium, seeing Evie Daniels dressed in the unmistakable attire of executive leadership, standing where Julian Thorne was scheduled to announce his devastating, strategic restructuring just hours before, was clearly a shock. Instead of Julian delivering news of layoffs and closures, he was, at that very moment, clearing out his opulent office under the watchful eyes of security supervision. Good morning, everyone, I began, my voice amplified slightly by the microphone, carrying clearly through the suddenly silent auditorium. Once everyone was seated, their expectant faces turned towards me, I continued. For those of you who don't know me personally, my name is Evelyn Hayes. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of surprise and recognition spreading outwards. However, I continued, meeting their gazes directly, some of you, particularly those in the marketing department, knew me for the past 2 years as Evie Daniels. The murmuring intensified, punctuated by audible gasps of disbelief from those who had worked closely with Evie. That was by design, I explained calmly. It was a difficult decision, but one I felt was necessary. For the past 2 years, I've had the unique privilege of working alongside many of you, experiencing firsthand the day-to-day realities the challenges, and the incredible dedication within this company. And also witnessing the significant changes in our culture and operations under the previous leadership. I briefly, factually outlined the events of the past 24 hours, Julian Thorne's removal by the board, the immediate cancellation of the Viridian Dynamics merger talks, the halting of the planned Raleigh facility closure, and the reversal of the research division outsourcing. With each piece of positive news, the palpable tension in the room gradually began to transform, replaced by cautious relief, then growing hope. Just yesterday, I stated, my voice resonating with shared experience, Julian Thorne fired me from my role as Evie Daniels, publicly calling me a dead weight. I paused, letting the irony sink in. Today, as the acting CEO of Hayes Biopharma, I want to talk about what truly makes someone valuable to this company. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. It wasn't charts or graphs. It displayed a collage of photos, employees from every level and department, dedicated research scientists in lab coats, meticulous quality control technicians, hardworking manufacturing staff from the Raleigh plant, diligent administrative personnel, creative marketers, even the friendly faces from the maintenance crew. Value at Hayes Biopharma, I declared firmly, is not, and will never again be, determined solely by job title, office location, or salary bracket. True value, I continued, my voice filled with conviction, is measured by integrity, by dedication, by collaboration, and by unwavering commitment to the core mission my grandfather established and my father upheld, creating affordable, effective, and safe medications that genuinely improve people's lives. I then proceeded to outline the key pillars of my restructuring plan, the Phoenix Initiative. Not the destructive plan Julian had envisioned, built on fear and short-term greed, but one designed to reinforce our core values while strategically adapting to the realities of the modern market. No mass layoffs, no compromises on quality or patient safety, no abandonment of vital research projects like neurogenics. Instead, renewed investment in R&D, empowerment of employees, strengthening of quality control, and rebuilding trust. Furthermore, I announced, moving to a crucial point of governance change, we are immediately implementing a new permanent board position specifically designated to represent employee interests. This elected representative will ensure that your voices, concerns, and perspectives are heard and considered at the very highest level of decision-making going forward. As I spoke, detailing the reversal of Julian's damaging policies and outlining the path towards a more collaborative and ethical future, I noticed my former supervisor from marketing discreetly wiping away tears, a look of profound relief on her face. Nearby, a group of researchers who had undoubtedly feared for their jobs were now smiling broadly, exchanging hopeful glances. Finally, I concluded my address, looking out at the sea of faces, seeing hope replacing the anxiety that had filled the room just minutes before. I want to personally acknowledge the toxic leadership environment and the culture of fear that too many of you have endured over the past 2 years. My voice was filled with empathy and resolve. That ends today. The auditorium erupted. Hesitant at first, then building rapidly into a wave of thunderous, sustained applause, an affirmation not just for me, but for the reclaiming of their company's soul. Later that afternoon, after the town hall, I encountered Julian Thorne one last time. He stood stiffly in the main lobby, flanked by security guards, waiting impatiently for his car. He'd been permitted to collect only his strictly personal belongings under supervision, no files, no company data storage devices. Absolutely no proprietary information could leave the building with him. I approached him, maintaining a professional, neutral distance. There was nothing left to gain from further confrontation. You won't succeed, you know, he said, his voice low and dripping with bitterness, his eyes avoiding mine. The market is ruthless. It's changing too fast. He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of contempt and defeat. Your father's idealistic approach is hopelessly outdated. Hayes Biopharma, he predicted venomously, will be obsolete within 5 years under your naive leadership. Perhaps, I acknowledged calmly, refusing to take the bait, refusing to let his bitterness infect the fragile hope rebuilding within the company. But if we are, Julian, we will face that future with our integrity intact. Julian laughed then, a short, cold, humorless sound. Integrity doesn't pay the shareholders, Evelyn. Only profits matter. Actually, I countered quietly but firmly, sustainable growth, built upon a foundation of quality products, ethical practices, and employee trust, pays shareholders quite well over the long term. It just requires patience, vision, and a perspective that extends beyond the next quarterly earnings report, qualities you clearly lack. His expensive town car pulled up to the curb, the tinted windows gliding down silently. But before stepping inside, he turned back one last time, a strange, almost pitying look on his face. "You know," he said, shaking his head slightly, "I almost feel sorry for you, Hayes. Trapped by your father's legacy. You could have learned so much from me about how the real world works." "Oh, I did learn from you, Julian," I replied softly, my voice devoid of anger, only a profound sense of clarity remaining. "I learned exactly how I never, ever want to lead." He stared at me for a moment, perhaps searching for a flicker of doubt or regret, finding none. Then, without another word, he slid into the back seat of the car, and it pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the bustling Boston traffic. His defeat was absolute. The company he had tried to dismantle for personal gain would now not only survive but thrive without him. Its future paradoxically strengthened by the very values he had so arrogantly tried to eliminate. Back in my office, my father's old office, which Julian had predictably redecorated in cold, sterile, modern minimalism that screamed of impersonal power, I found Marcus Vance waiting. A bottle of vintage champagne and 2 crystal flutes resting on the corner of the large desk. Elias Vance joined him moments later, his expression warm with approval. "Congratulations, Evelyn," Marcus said, his familiar, kind smile reaching his eyes as he expertly popped the cork. He poured 2 glasses, the bubbles fizzing merrily. "Your father, Robert, he would be incredibly proud of you today." "I hope so, Marcus," I replied sincerely, accepting the offered glass, the crystal cool against my fingers. My gaze swept around the office, taking in the changes Julian had wrought, already planning how to restore its former warmth and character. "There's still so much damage to undo, so much trust to rebuild." Marcus smiled knowingly. "Perhaps," he conceded, "but now you have an entire company, revitalized and eager, ready to help you do it." Mr. Vance nodded in agreement. "He's right, Evie. The real work starts now, but the foundation is secure once more." They were right. The real, challenging work was just beginning. Healing the wounds, restoring the culture, navigating the market ethically yet successfully. But as I looked around the room, at the hopeful faces of my 2 staunchest allies, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in too long, often lonely years, Hayes Biopharma felt united again, anchored by a common purpose. Ready to face the future together. On the sterile expanse of the desk sat the single-framed photo my father had always kept there, a picture of him and my grandfather, beaming, standing proudly in front of the original Raleigh facility sign. Julian, predictably, had removed it, tucking it away in a drawer. I had retrieved it earlier. Next to it, I now placed a new photo, a candid snapshot taken at the company picnic last summer. It showed me, as Evie Daniels, laughing, caught completely unaware, surrounded by my smiling colleagues from the marketing team. Both images represented vital parts of my identity: Evelyn Hayes, the inheritor of a legacy, and Evie Daniels, the colleague who had seen the company from the inside out. Together, they represented the synthesis of past and future, leadership and empathy, that would guide Hayes Biopharma forward. I gently touched the familiar, worn face of my father's watch on my wrist, its steady ticking a quiet reminder of continuity and purpose. I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I toasted, my voice clear and strong. "And," Marcus added, his eyes twinkling as he raised his own glass, "to the very best kind of revenge. Success earned on your own terms." Mr. Vance smiled, lifting his glass high. "To Hayes Biopharma. And to its future." We clinked glasses, the clear sound ringing hopefully in the quiet office.